Good afternoon, innovators. David Wright here, and I am your host of the Disruptive Innovators Champions of Digital Business podcast. And today I am lucky enough to be joined by my good friend, Holly Hahn. Holly, it's a pleasure to have you on.
Nice to be here. It's always good to talk to you.
Yeah, absolutely. So Holly, I know we kind of connected a number of years ago. You've had a number of different interesting roles that we'll talk more about with our listeners. But for anybody who's not familiar, can you just take a moment to share a little bit about your current role?
Yep. Right now, my role is SVP of operations, and that meaning I'm running the operations for entertainment partners today. And what that means is I'm trying to enable all our business leaders, business line leaders, to be as effective and as successful as they can be with the support of the cross functional shared services team.
Yeah. Um, Super timely. I was just having a conversation earlier today with some other IT and operations leaders about how over the course of my career and particularly before I founded Disruptive Innovations, but even earlier on in our evolution, we saw that although a lot of the projects that we rolled out were technically implemented in excellence, right? That operationally they were seen as a failure. And it was quite a few of them, unfortunately, right? And I, as a young technologist, didn't really know how to affect change in that way. And last time we got together in California, we kind of had some really good conversations about that stuff. So really excited for people to learn from your experience. We actually like to start the episode because I'm sure we'll get into a number of pieces of advice, but with if there was one piece of actionable advice you'd look to leave the listeners with today, what would that be?
Well, I was thinking about it and how there's so many advice because I learned from my own mistake. I did pick one that I was thinking about what your audience and listener will be interested. I think it's the one that probably the first big lesson I learned is um, good ideas are not enough. More importantly, we need to be able to implement and execute well, and also make sure that it's distinct. And I think really tie back to what you were just mentioning, because and maybe just dive in a little bit into as an how I even learned that was in college. When I studied architecture, one of my professor said, "But just don't you all come and tell me I have a good idea and you need an A. There's no A for ideas. There's A for good execution." And then now you fast forward in the professional world, well, just execute it one time isn't enough because most of that we're not going to really see the result and the benefit. Put a lot of effort into implementing. So really, as it's good idea needs to be implemented and sustained so that we really see the fruit of that labor. And so it really tie into everything you just said.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and it's so cool because you've had diverse experiences too, right? You've worked in healthcare, you've worked technology companies. I do want to take a moment. I mean, you just shared some experience from college and you had studied architecture to learn a little bit more about your journey, where you started out. So maybe we could start there because, like, here you are, EVP of operations, having studied architecture. So that's like an interesting, you know, change of direction. But like, just a little bit about your journey and how you got to the point that you're at in your career today.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so I started in architecture. I like the idea of design solving problem. I think it was more intrinsic than explicit. And later on, I kind of realized that, oh, what I was doing in architecture is really to solve problem in a always creative and elegant way. Because, you want to be aesthetically pleasing. And so that's kind of how I started. And what I learned in architecture, while studying architecture, I also work as an intern for 3 of the 4 years. It's a very technical industry. So I'm like, well, as an international student, that isn't the best way to go if you want to stay in America. which I did one. And so I actually switched to in business. And the reason I got into the business was from the West Coast, I went to East Coast after I graduated from college. You need to explore the world when you come from, Hong Kong, a little tiny place. And so I went from the West Coast to New York. And in New York, I saw that people didn't have the coffee culture that we have at Berkeley. And so I was like, people must have, they're missing out in life. And so I had a business partner that I was able to convince, and we started a cafe business. And that's how, we started in the business journey. From there, we subsequently opened two other businesses. And then I realized I really don't know what to do with that. I mean, I can continue to create these small business, but I know I can see that being as a self-employed, like running out of time in the day. So I was only smart enough to understand that I don't know anything. So I need to go back. The fastest way to learn was the business school. So that's why I went to business school. And after there, I want to learn about the corporate world. And so I got in there, and that's how I actually got into sourcing and procurement, which is my first entry into operations. And from there, I bounced into the best way to learn management consulting. So I got in there and I spent 10 years learning, starting in sourcing and procurement to supply chain to all aspect of operations. And from there, that's when living in California, I need to be in the high tech. So I have this desire, and I then got recruited into Rackspace, which is a high tech company, super different, super interesting. That was in the peak of their business when they were competing with AWS. If you can actually imagine that for a moment. um, well, the whole story there, we may or may not get into, but then and from there, I then went into health tech, as you allude to. Very interesting journey where we converted or pivot from a service company to a product company in the course of 7 to 8 years. Take the company IPO and then sold to United Health. It's a tremendous journey there. And from there, I went into my current company, which is similar but very different. It's in the entertainment. Oh, actually, it's in financial and accounting industry, but we focus specifically on the entertainment vertical. So that's kind of where my journey is. But if you hear everything is strategy and operations, so that is where my passion is.
Yeah. Well, it's so crucial. I mean, it's as I've got well, you said a number of things that I really appreciated. Just I'm about I think this will be like my 108th or 109th recording. And I've come to realize the leaders and the friends that I respect the most are the ones that are students of the world, and what I mean by that is uh they have a level of humility such that like they can constantly or continuously, I should say, be learning from everything, right? Because
Yep.
who there's the the more that I've learned,
Mm.
right? And because I continuously learn more as the days go by, the less I realize I know
You go.
because of the vastness of the universe and the
And
world and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So like for example, I'm about to go to South Africa in a few weeks. I know very, very, very little about South Africa, about its culture, about the
Mhm.
animals that are there,
Wow.
like nothing,
Yeah.
nothing. So,
Yep.
I just really appreciate that.
Yeah.
And the journey itself. I mean, across the different organizations that you worked with and your
Mhm.
different experiences, what would you say is one of the most profound lessons that you learned, or just like or a time maybe even that a project failed but you ultimately took away a really valuable lesson. What are some of the experiences you might be able to share with us there? I mean, we might even be able to talk about that other story which I thought was really interesting. Um,
Yeah. Well, I think maybe I'll take that question this way. There is uh the biggest hurdle that I have overcome, and when I look back and I thought to myself, I don't even know where they came from. Besides the fact that the belief it was the right thing to do for the company, I don't know otherwise where my tenacity or my even courage at some point come from. So in my last company, I ran the technology department. I mean, ran meaning operationally. I led the technology department. The biggest goal there was, as I mentioned, we were trying to pivot from a service company to a product company. So we basically have to scale the technology organization, everything you name, engineering, infrastructure, security, everything. And so part of it is technology is being seen as a shared services. So we would have to allocate the cost back to the business unit. The allocation methodology was not documented and it was not updated. So I actually, because that was my budget to manage, hundreds of million, and I was, well, they're not allocated correctly, so therefore we're not making the right business decisions. Like deep in my heart, that's what I was believing. So I was trying to convince my finance partner. At one point, I finally went to talk to the CFO and I said, well, we really need to change the allocation methodology because it doesn't represent our total cost for the product correctly. And, of course, I was naive when I asked that question. There was a lot of implication when you do that. Even though when I start asking that question, we were still a private company, PE back, but there's still a lot of reporting. So it's not that they didn't agree with me or they not listening, but they're like, Holly, that's just a lot. We have to backdate our reporting for 3 years and so on and so on. But I never gave up, and I actually had gone through 3 CFO over the course of 3 years, um, and I finally convinced the last one that we really we really need to do it. And so once we did that, it actually one of the as an example, why it's so important, one of the business we've been looking to sunset, well, actually, we didn't allocate it correctly, and so we shouldn't sunset that product because it's profitable, and we needed to focus on, you know, sunset another legacy product. And so if we would have not correct allocation, we would have probably ultimately made the wrong business decision for the company. So it was a 3-year journey and going up to the CFO, keep requesting the same thing that we've been told a couple of times. You know, "Thank you for your input. Why don't you manage your own costs and let us do our own thing and we'll be good." And again, I don't think that they truly didn't hear me. I think it's because they figured the trade-off was so huge that it didn't outweigh, but it did in my heart, I think it was, and I look back and I'm like, "Man, was I, like, raising my hands like, 'Fire me, fire me,' I'm making a lot of noise, fire me." But
no, I think it goes back to, and because we talked about this offline, like you were talking about your experience as a management consultant and
Mhm.
how did you put it about like not being afraid to hear no, or what did they say about that?
um, I don't know which one, but sometimes I think
Like
yeah.
basically like the fact that like not being afraid to be honest with the
Right,
customer
uh-uh.
about X, right? Like
Right.
about and I think as entities or individuals or what have you that are ultimately B2B and supporting different institutions or even internally within an
Yeah.
organization, right?
Mhm.
Um, it can the easier, softer way can often be to just go with the flow,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
Um, but I think it takes, and you mentioned courage to
Mhm.
really push for things that you feel are right,
Yep.
and that are for the greater benefit of, the organization and the
Yep.
people that they serve.
Yeah.
So, Um,
So I think, I probably said something along the line that, when people say no, I take it as in not now. That's usually how, if for something that truly matters and truly I believe is very important, I probably had discovered things that where I thought was right and was convinced that not necessarily the only right answer. That happens, as well. But I think if there are very clear places where things are absolutely the right, like the one I just mentioned as an example, it was clear to me like how the data all lined up and how decision are made. How can this not be critical, right? And every time when I get a no, I said, "It's not yet. I'm gonna, I'm gonna try again." But I also don't believe in like blasting into a door is the right way to do it. You do have to bring people along, make sure that they also bought into the the reasoning of doing it and actually partnering together to do that. And actually it's funny, by the time the last CFO agreed with me, he said, "Well, Holly, you really want that, put a person in here to work with us." And I end up to pony up with someone to work with finance for 9 months to really reset the whole, allocation model. But, I have to put my mouth where it lent.
yeah, yeah, and I mean, it really speaks to, a level of resilience too. It reminds me, I forget if I shared this with you, but, like, when I started Disruptive Innovations, a couple years in, we got into a fairly large health system. The health system, that I won't mention by name, but, like, where my children were born, where I have relatives that work there, it's like my hometown, one of the biggest health systems in the area. Um, I met with the chief strategy officer. She kindly took a meeting with me. We're still a fairly young organization, and she heard my pitch, and I clearly knew what I was talking about. And but she said something to the effect of like, "David, listen, like you seem like a nice enough guy. Um, and by all accounts, it sounds like you know what you're talking about. But to be honest with you, even if I like believed 100% in what you were doing, I wouldn't even really be able to reiterate it effectively within this huge organization across IT, across digital, across all the people that I would need to enroll in order to try to convince them that you were the entity that we needed to help us with like customer experience optimization." So, and we're huge. She was basically like, "We are X organization, and you're still like,"
Yeah.
and not in a condescending way, but in a kind of like just a realistic way. And
Yeah.
I was like, Okay." I was like, "Fair, fair." And over the next 3 to 4 years, I ended up becoming friends with the guy who would become their chief digital officer, a bunch of their IT staff, a bunch of their operational folks, just like,
Mhm.
and then sure enough, one day this chief digital officer was like, "Wait, David, don't you know about this stuff?" And an opportunity opened up, and
Mhm.
now we're engaged with this entity. It's like almost 4 years
Wow,
later,
that's
you
amazing.
know?
Yeah. Well, yeah, not now. Just not now.
Exactly. Um, so super cool. Holly, what about I like to because I want to talk a little bit more about your work at Entertainment Partners.
No.
Um before I do, um first and foremost, do you want to recall any of your days at Rackspace? I know you made some like really profound uh recommendations that I thought were kind of almost like Nostradamus-esque.
That was
I don't know.
such a compliment. I it was funny. So 2 things that even in my short time there was 2 things that I had suggested. One was just based on my, how I was probably optimistic, naive, all mixed into you know, that entrepreneur spirit that was always inside me, even though it's not about me, it's about the goodness of the company, but just having that entrepreneurial spirit that I couldn't, you know, suppressed. And so what happened was, it was, as I mentioned, was in 2014, and the company was competing. In fact, I believe they were even leading, if not, they were among the top three of the uh, cloud or a cloud provider provider in the country. So the other ones that was competing was AWS, as well as I believe Azure. So it was like the three big one, and but everyone was talking about, well, we need to have private cloud. And so I was thinking, well, why would people need private cloud? Well, because they want to have higher security. Why would they need higher security? Probably in protecting sensitive data. Well, what is the most sensitive data? Healthcare data. Okay, well, is anyone doing anything that would meet those HIPAA compliance? And if no one is, that would be a great white space to get into. And if we're already leader in this industry, can we actually take the first adopter or the first, entry benefit? And so I took it upon myself to do the market study. What was the space? And somewhere in the neighborhood, if I remember correctly, it's like 17 billion. And it's like, okay, if we are a leader, can we get 10%? By doing it, what does it take to get in? Or so ultimately, I presented a business case to the head of the company and said, I think that we could, within the next 8 to 7 to 10 months, like, within the like certain amount of time, short time, that we can get ourselves enough capability to meet the list requirements for HIPAA data. And then we'll have the roadmap to continue to, increase the capability so that we'll maintain that leadership position. And, you know, 10% to 20%, very, very conservative estimate, is still a really big market. Well, they didn't really have the appetite at the time, but I think later on, and in fact, you share with me now, 10 plus years later, they are the biggest hosting for Epic, which I'm very happy to hear that they did go on that journey, no matter was a little bit behind, but got there. And so that was amazing. And so I feel validated somehow. And then yeah, and then the other one that which was interesting, because I think I mentioned to you and I didn't have as much detail then. I didn't have too much, but I have a little bit more insight was I was asked to compare two security related company. And actually I cannot remember. The second one was CloudStrike was one, and the other one I cannot remember the name. And I'm trying to look up the document that I wrote, couldn't find it. But anyway, the long story there was I did the assessment on the capability, competitive advantage. How is it going to be complementary to our to Rackspace um, capability at the time? And so I recommended to the executive and then went to the board for CloudStrike, and they actually made that, and they actually made a, I believe, like up to 9-digit type of improvement to their revenue. So I felt pretty good about that recommendation that had bring the value to the company. So the two things that were probably I didn't expect to be the return it was. I just thought was the right thing to do, and trying to do my best to make a recommendation based on the data available. That was before all the chat GPT was there. So it took me a little bit effort, but um, so I'm very happy to hear how they did eventually have, benefit to the company.
100%.
Yeah.
Um, so one of the things I do like to ask is about either your favorite book or literary piece, or it could even be a podcast, either that you've been consuming recently or all time? Really just, anything you might recommend to the to listeners to check out.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking about, a few books and thinking about the topics and, and the type of audience that you might have. The book is called Leadership Blueprint. It's almost like a workbook setting where you can go through it. And the author is Bill Conrad, I think is how you pronounce the last name. He was the Campbell CEO for like 10 years, bring them back from, really a dire state to where they were, now. And so what the book really talk about is almost like a workshop that you can go through. And one thing that I actually use in my day to day, and I keep that in mind, is leadership is um not an entitlement, and it's also not a destination. It is a privilege. So we should do it with purpose and actually set that purpose and you should refresh it what that is, but go with, a purpose to be the kind of leader that you want to be. Not because you've been here for a long time, not because you have these skill set, is a privilege to lead other. So that was one big thing. And then there's many steps that go through in the book, which I thought was fantastic for any you know, either aspire or even experienced leader that can be a good reminder and how to be a good, effective leader.
Yeah, I actually, I had to check that out. I was just having that conversation with my COO earlier today about how, like, as we scale, myself in particular as a entrepreneur, someone who started as a solopreneur, um, how am I investing in the personal and professional development of my, employees? Like, what am I doing to lead more effectively and inspire?
Mhm.
Uh, because it can't just be telling people what to do. It's just not an effective way to lead. So, um, different tools, different ways of being, different methodologies. We're
Yep.
kind of exploring all of it. So I'm excited to check that out.
Yeah, highly recommended.
Um, and so now that brings us to your current role as
Mhm.
SVP of
Mhm.
operations
Yes.
at Entertainment Partners, and,
Yep.
like, when I was looking at, like, the website and kinda just, like, a little bit about what you guys are up to, and I know you have a national or even global presence. It seemed like you guys did like you were, helping with, sets and you were doing this kinda stuff, but tell us just a little bit more about Entertainment Partners and what you guys do exactly.
So we are a accounting financial company that focus on focus on production company that are in the entertainment industry.
Got it. So those production companies would be like customers of yours effectively?
Correct. Yeah. So anybody that is producing content can be, and most of them are
Okay.
our, customer.
So, like, Netflix could be a potential
Yep.
customer, for
Yep.
example.
Yep.
Got it.
Exactly.
And why would these companies go with, like, what's Entertainment Partners' competitive advantage, um, versus, like, the other big accounting firms? Like, why would they go with you guys versus
Right. So we
yeah.
are, well, we are a service provider to them that have also a set of digital tools that you know, um, we provide for them and or they can subscribe to with us to help them manage their accounting and financial activities. The reason why is because and it's very unique, but also makes a lot of sense. When you think about how company uh, started to produce a some content, either be a movie or TV show, they actually put together a what I call a shell company. That's probably not a industry term, but
Right.
it's like they set up LLC or something, yeah, an
About that.
entity, yeah,
Yeah.
for that matrix LLC, and then they put all the costs through it, and then they shut it down. I don't remember exactly how, or do I know Matrix, but let's just say it was done in 8 months, produced in 8 months. So one after they produce it in 8 months, they will actually shut down the company, that shell company, and any these big network or studio that you can think of, like the Paramount, the world, they could have hundreds of them, and as they go through and produce different, movies, TV shows, music, anything. And so they don't actually develop or set up the business infrastructure to in this company. So they need someone to help, provide those business to support those business activities. And most of the business activities really is accounting and financial activities. And so then they hire service provider like us to do it. And in this day and age, no one does everything just by our fingers. Of course, it's going to be enabled by technology. And there's also we also have digital products that enable them to do things that they need it, either be, accounting, their mini ERP, if you think of it that way, because they would have to generate detail and record to support their, reporting as well. So things like that nature, or they tools to help them budget to start off with.
What are some of the key initiatives that you're working on for them today?
Well, so we are working on I'm sure, that's no surprise that as everyone is experimenting with AI, so are we. And so some of the things that I am looking into is how do we strengthen our data management practice to make sure that we are robust enough to enable any of the AI solution that we will be, thinking about, experimenting, also the governance around it to make sure that there's um, no garbage in, so therefore no garbage out, but also coming out with the the output is also, safe, ethical, and all those good stuff. So that would be, that's definitely one of the really big one that we're working on. And we're trying to be, and it's the industry is definitely glowing global. We want to make sure that we are strong and robust to, for to support our client internationally. So that is
Mhm.
some of the top initiative that we are working on.
What about some of the biggest challenges that you guys are facing as an organization? Like, is any of the like macroeconomic or like political type, changes affecting you guys, or is it more localized? Like, what are some of the things that you feel you're like needing to overcome in recent weeks or years?
Well, I think there's, these days, when we think about that economical and political, there's a lot to do with the tariff. And of course, when you talk about spending, tariff has some. And then you get in this particular industry, there was like a bunch of contract renewal that um, where increased the cost structure in the industry. So that is definitely something that the industry is resetting, trying to figure out how to do that. And then the other part would be there's something called incentive. Basically, is how much incentive the either be international or locally, providing when people produce content or produce shows in the territory. And so those are all kind of has impact in not as much as directly to my company actually is to the
Right.
industry. But since we're so focused in the industry, anything affect them could affect us. So it's more of that um, chain effect that we have.
Right. 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 No, super interesting.
Yeah.
It cool too because like it's an industry that admittedly I don't have like a ton of experience with. So I've got to learn a lot from you through our conversations, just kind of about the industry and stuff like that. Very cool. Um, well, Holly, we have just a couple more minutes here. This has been awesome. Um, one of the questions I like to close out with is just if you could go back 5, 10, even 15 years in time, what advice would you give your younger self?
Well, it was it would be, um, an advice that I had received, and it took me probably, like, 15 to 20 years to really appreciate. Um, I once was told that, and I wish that I had learned that lesson earlier, and hence to answer your question, is instead of so focused on achieving a certain destination or be at certain destination, I need to be at this level in 2 years. I need to be really enjoying the journey. And I remember
Mm,
when I was told that 20 years ago by a very senior, partner when I was in my, consulting days, and I thought to myself, "Well, that's easy for you to say. You are at
right.
the, at the end of your like, peak and end of your career, and that's easy for you to say, 'Oh, enjoy the journey.'" I'm like, "I'm here starting. I need to, dig hard, and I need to go as fast as I can to accelerate and advance." Um, I think that really learning isn't about you don't put your all into achieving your destination, but or your progress. But also don't forget along the way that experience because that experience itself is what built you to be tomorrow. So
Yeah.
don't overlook that. And that's it. And then I was thinking, like, this is like a slow ball moment, right? Where I am today, I'm this big giant slow ball is because I've all these experience and learning that I'm accumulating to be who I am today. So don't forget that and enjoy it because I'm there anyway. So enjoy it. And I think that I would just give me such a better mindset when I was going through instead of so singly focused on the next step.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's such great advice. I mean, and it resonates with me because I only had that kind of revelation in recent years, and I'm sure I was given that advice like you 20 years prior. Um, but not some people never arrive at that place.
Yep.
It's always about and I've brought up this book by Arthur Brooks, From Strength to Strength, and he talks about the fluid intelligence curve and the crystallized intelligence curve, and how as a striver, right, a consultant, someone who's trying to climb the ladder, you're focused on that destination. You get there and then it's like, okay, what's next? You're never it's very for me, it lacked fulfillment because the things that truly feed my soul are when I'm contributing to the growth of others, or when I'm like sharing my experience without expectation. When I'm in that place as a striver, really I'm obsessed with myself. I'm obsessed with my advancement, and for me, that led to a ton of fear.
Mhm.
Fear of failure, fear of losing what I was, accumulating, just like constant, like, fear. And, I did well, you know what I mean? It's
Yeah.
like but it wasn't, um, it wasn't particularly life bringing. And what I would argue, right, if per your advice, is that you can do both, right? Like you can still, and you kind of alluded to this, like you can still succeed and have goals and aspirations, but not be so tied to them that you're not appreciating this moment in life, which is, and I loved what you said before about like entitlement with leadership. It's like this moment in and of itself is a gift.
Yeah.
Not everybody gets to enjoy this moment. There are people that, died earlier today from preventable illnesses or from, just random coincidence.
Yeah.
And I didn't. So like, let me be grateful for this moment and not so obsessed with, that next thing that I can't appreciate, what I have.
Yeah. One of the thing that I was gonna mention, when we talk about biggest challenges, more general, like from what I learned in my career, not so specifically in a particular role, was to have self-confidence and not
Mm,
having the imposter syndrome. And that was something that I would say haunted me for a long time. Particularly when I was in the consulting world, you want to appear to be the one that know and be able to advise, and so it really heightened that imposter syndrome. And I do wish that I have learned how to um, get past that, like I am today. And so what I do now, and I was actually credited to a leader that when my last company said, it's like, it's the practice mindset. I don't know, I mentioned to you last time we talked, but it's getting to that practice mindset. So everything we do is a practice. I'm not trying to be a perfect. In fact, I'm trying to even telling others in my teams, throw that word out of the conversation because there's no point in being perfect. As soon as you think you're perfect, you're already not. And so, and depending on what you're measuring at, but if you have the practice mindset, well, I didn't do as well. What did I learn? Let's do it again. And or, oh, I did a pretty good job. I got a good practice here. Let me do it again. Make sure I do it again. Or let's see, I tried to do that again. So I think that mindset is actually very freeing and it really support the growth mindset. But the most important liberating part is then you don't have to feel the imposter because you're not imposing, you're just practicing, you just learning. Um, so that was after I kind of gave you the more concrete example, I thought I wish I actually used this because it was a bigger revelation for me as a person and as I grow.
yeah. Well, we'll use both.
Whatever you want to
Yeah,
use.
I love it. Holly, it was an absolute pleasure to have you
And
on. Thank you so much for taking the time today.
of course, thank you.
And to our listeners, thank you guys all for tuning in, and we will catch you all next week.